Good morning, class. I'm Miss Gonzalez. How are you today?
Okay naman po.
That's good to hear. Okay, it's nice to see you again and be present at the hearing in this histology class. From what we discussed last week, we will have a panel discussion today regarding our topic, which is the types of tissues and their functions. We will start with the basics of its information, but before we delve into its in-depth discussion, so is the assigned group ready? Okay na ba kayo? Sige. For the discussion, I'll let you all prepare a while, like 3 minutes. Is that okay with you guys? Or are you guys like ready to start now?
Okay lang.
Good po, thank you.
I think okay na kayo eh. So, in this panel discussion, the students will ask about this topic and will share information regarding the basic information about the types and functions of the tissues. So, here are our panel members. Ms. Gayo, Mr. Imperal, Mr. Bardoloza, Mr. Olesco, and Ms. Fulo. Okay, I will moderate this panel discussion as an example for other groups. Is that okay with you guys? Okay na kayo? Sige. Okay, starting with Ms. Gayo. Enlighten us about histology.
Have you ever wondered what histology is all about? Histology is a study of the tissue of the body and how these tissues arrange to constitute its organs. These subjects involve all aspects of tissues biology, with a focus on how cell structure and arrangements optimize functions and specific to each organ. Histology is a study of the structure and functions of tissues. It's crucial to understand what a normal tissue looks like and how it functions in order to recognize various disorders. It also aids in determining what causes particular diseases, how to treat them, and whether or not the treatment is effective. So according to research, using tissue is essential to understand the causes of cancer, identify targets for treatments, discover biomarkers that can identify characteristics of a cancer, and also develop treatments that target a specific gene or signaling process. Histology is important for medical students in a variety of ways. It helps individuals in comprehending the typical organ systems arrangement of the cell and tissues. Furthermore, it ties structure to function by linking tissues structural differentiation to specific functions. It can help students understand cell behavior and reproduction, making cellular biology more accessible. Understanding histology also allows students to predict and explain organ activity and function, because tissues are the building blocks of practically everything in the body. So let's just continue to explore associated topics such as types, functions, and other terminologies that we will definitely come across as we delve deeper into our topic, which is histology.
Thank you, Ms. Gayo, for that wonderful introduction. So now let's discuss the different types and function of the different tissues. So let's begin with Ms. Imperial. You can start now.
Yes, so I will share some brief information about the epithelial tissues, which basically cover our whole body and internal organs. Do you know that it is the first line of defense of our body against pathogenic microorganisms? So epithelial tissues are composed of closely aggregated polyhedral cells adhering closely to one another in a thin layer of extracellular matrix, forming cellular sheaths that line the cavities of organs and cover our body surfaces, whether internal or external. Functions of the epithelial tissues include covering, lining, protecting in the epidermis, absorption on the intestinal lining, and secretion on parenchymal cells of the glands. There are four characteristics of the epithelial tissues according to cell shape, which are squamous cells, cuboidal, columnar, and stratified cells. Most of the epithelia are adjacent to the connective tissue that contains the blood vessels from which the epithelial cells receive nutrients from oxygen. So epithelial tissues are renewed continuously by mitotic activity and stem cell populations. I hope you have learned the concept of epithelial tissues with this brief discussion.
Thank you so much, Miss Imperial. As of now, we have a better understanding of epithelial tissue. I didn't know that it has different shapes, so like cuboidal, squamous, pseudo. Wow. Now, moving on to Mr. Alesco.
There are 4 types of connective tissue: loose areolar connective tissue, dense connective tissue, specialized connective tissue, and embryonic connective tissue. There are 2 types of dense connective tissues, which are dense regular connective tissue and dense irregular connective tissue. From the word itself, dense regular connective tissues are oriented in the same direction, while dense irregular connective tissues are braided in multiple directions. It has tensile strength in a variety of directions. Beneath the specialized connective tissue, there are 4 types: adipose, cartilage, bone, and blood. Finally, embryonic connective tissue has 2 types: mesenchyme and mucous connective tissue. Embryonic connective tissue develops during the embryo's development. Mesenchyme give rise to the body's numerous connective tissues. The umbilical cord, for example, contains mucoid connective tissue, which is a gelatinous material. There are also 3 types of connective tissue fibers: collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. Most of those are type 1 collagen, which is the most abundant protein in the body. Elastic fibers contain elastin and fibrillin. Elasticity is defined as the ability to be stretched and still return to its original length. Lastly, type 3 collagen is found in reticular fibers that provide support, consisting of a network of tiny fibers.
Oh, wow! Mr. Alesco, thank you for giving us enough knowledge about connective tissue. I didn't know that blood is also a connective tissue. So, let's move on to the next one, which is the muscular tissue. Mr. Bardaloza is the one who will discuss that.
So, I'm Miss Ibardalosa, and we will be talking about the muscle tissues. The main function of muscle tissues is to contract to make the movement possible. These contractions result from the contractile protein located within the muscle cells. There are 3 types of muscle tissues: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal muscle. The first one is the smooth muscle. The smooth muscle forms a hollow organ and can be also found in our skin or in the eyes. It is responsible also for moving food through our digestive tract and emptying urinary bladder. The second one is the cardiac muscle. It is a muscle of our heart, and it's responsible for pumping blood. The cardiac muscle is under the involuntary control, means ones that do not move or control under the conscious control of a person. The third one is the skeletal muscle. It is attached to the skeleton. That's why it's called skeletal muscle, and enables the body to move. Skeletal muscles described as a voluntary control because a person can purposely move or cause the skeletal muscle contraction to achieve the body movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bardaloza. And now, we have a better understanding of muscular tissue. Next is about nervous tissue that will be discussed by Ms. Fulo. Okay, go.
Next one to be discussed is the nervous tissue. The brain, spinal cord, and nerves all include nerve tissue. It is responsible for coordinating and controlling various bodily functions. It promotes muscle contraction, raises environmental awareness, and is involved in emotions, memory, and reasoning. To perform all of this, nerve tissue cells must be able to communicate with one another through what we call electrical nerve impulses. Neurons or nerve cells are the cells in nervous tissue that generate and conduct impulses. These cells have three principal parts, which are the dendrites, the cell body, the axon. The cell body is the most significant component of the cell, the part that performs all of the functions. Dendrites are the cytoplasmic extensions or processes that transport impulses to the cell body. An axon is a type of extension or process that conducts impulses away from the cell body. Nervous tissue also contains cells that assist the functions of the neurons rather than transmitting impulses. The glial cells or the neuroglial cells are collectively known as the neuroglia, and supporting cells, also known as the glia, bind and insulate neurons. Others provide nourishment by binding blood arteries to the neurons, while others are phagocytic and guard against bacterial invasion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fulo, for discussing the nervous tissue so that we can have a greater understanding of what we're talking about in our topic. To sum it all up, histology is a branch of science where, unlike anatomy and physiology, that studies the anatomy of the human body as a whole, histology studies anatomy of the tissues at a microscopic level in order to know how tissue or cell is supposed to function under normal conditions, in order to diagnose and treat diseases of tissues. So, first, we talked about epithelial tissue. The type of tissue is a membrane composed of closely aggregated cells in the form of sheets covering the various body surfaces like internal tubes and cavities and lining the surface of the body. They are characterized by common structural features, especially their arrangement into a cohesive sheets, but have diverse functions, have possibly by many specialized adaptations. Then we have the connective tissue, that, the blood, that provides a matrix that supports and physically connect other tissues and cells together in organs. Unlike other types of tissues, which consist mostly of cells, the connective tissue is mostly extracellular fluid, where fibers, cells, and ground substances are found. Next, muscular tissue, which as many may know is responsible for locomotor and non-locomotor movements. So, it is composed of cells that are supported and bound together by intercellular material that consists of connective tissue. And finally, nervous tissue. It is considered as the most complex tissue in our body. It is formed by a network of billions nerve cells, of neurons, all assisted by numerous supporting cells called glial cells. Each neurons have interconnections with other neurons, forming a very complex system for processing information and generating responses. Now that we have all understand the different types and functions of tissues, let's move on to the next point of discussion. For any clarifications or questions, do you want to talk about anything, guys? Okay. Is there anyone in the crowd who wants to ask some questions? Okay. So, Ms. Bardaloza is being questioned by the audience. Could you explain how muscular contractions occur?
So, thank you for the question. But before I answer your question, let me talk about the layers of the muscle. A whole muscle is surrounded by a connective tissue sheet called epimysium, and each muscle is composed of muscle fascicles, each of which is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called perimysium. The fascicles is composed of individual muscle fiber, and each fiber is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called endomysium. Muscle fiber contains group of protein fibers called myofibrils, and these myofibrils are composed of protein filaments called myofilaments. Myofibrils. Myofibrils is where the contraction happens. Skeletal muscle has several sarcomeres in a muscle fiber. A sarcomere is mainly composed of actin and mucin myofilaments. The CDs anchor the actin myofilaments, and the M line holds the mucin myofilaments in place. Actin myofilaments are made of three components: actin, troponin, and tropomyosin. The actin strands have attachment site for the mucin myofilaments. They resemble 2-minute strands of pearls twisted together. Tropin molecules have a binding site for calcium ions. Troponin is attached to specific intervals along the actin myofilaments. Tropomyosin filaments block the mucin myofilaments binding site on the actin myofilaments. In an unstimulated muscle, tropomyosin filaments lie in the groove between the twisted strand of actin-myosin filament subunits. In other words, if there is no presence of calcium ions, the tropomyosin filaments cover the attachment site on the actin myofilaments, which prevent contractions from occurring. However, if the calcium ions is present, it binds to troponin, which causes the tropomyosin filaments to move. This exposes the attachment site on the actin myofilaments and the contraction happens. I hope we've answered your question. Thank you.
The audience is asking a question for Miss Pulo. Can nervous tissue repair itself, guys?
Well, the skin produces a large number of new cells after an injury and uses them to mend the wound. However, nerve cells in the brain, commonly known as the neurons, do not regenerate. They don't divide in any way. Nervous tissue, like muscle tissue, has a poor ability to repair itself. Neurons outside the brain and spinal cord can regenerate, but it's a slow process that requires the assistance of supporting neuroglia. Because brain and spinal cord cells do not renew in adults, the damage is usually irreversible. So I hope I have been helpful in answering your question. Thank you very much.
Very well said, Miss Pulo. So with those discussions and questions, I think it is time to conclude our panel discussion on basic tissue types and functions. Thank you for your participation towards this group. Therefore, let us take a small break before discussing our next lesson for today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating with us. We'll be right back after this short break.